Significant figures. Significant figures are simply a way of rounding. Now, before we look at them, let's consider our normal rounding rules. If I wanted to round this number to the nearest 10, the tens column is here. I have to check the next column over to see if I need to round up or not. If the next column was 5 or bigger, I would round the 4 up. If the next column was 4 or less, I would keep the 4 the same. In this case, the next column is a 9, which means that my 4 does need to increase to a 5. And then the 9 gets replaced by a 0. The 0 is known as a placeholder because it keeps everything else in the correct column. So even though I'm not interested in the information in the units column anymore, I need to make sure that there still is a units column. Otherwise, the 5 would no longer be in the tens column and it would change the value of the number. To the nearest 100, well, I've got 3, 4, 0, 3, 0, because when I check the hundreds column and then I check the 1 over, it's not a 5 or bigger, so the 3 stays as it is, and the remaining digits turn into zeros. To the nearest 1,000, well, the 0 is in the thousands column, but the 3 does not round it up, so it stays as a 0, and the remaining ones go to 0 as well. To the nearest 10,000, well, the 3 and the 4 bring me to the 10,000 column. The next digit is a 0, which doesn't change the 4. The remaining digits go to 0. Now, the problem is that if my number had not been 340,349, let's imagine that my number had been something like this, 0.034. Well, if I asked you to round that to the nearest 10, that would be nonsense. The answer would just be 0. If I asked you to round it to the nearest 100, the answer would just be 0. To the nearest 1,000, the answer would just be 0. So the way that I've rounded this number doesn't make sense for this number. Whereas with this number, if I wanted to round it, I would maybe round it to 1 decimal place, which would be 0.0. To 2 decimal places would be 0.03. Whereas if I did the original number to 2 decimal places, well, that wouldn't round it at all. It would just put a 0.00 on the end of it. That's no extra information. So the reason that we have significant figures is that if we compare a big number and a small number, we can't use the same rounding values for it. Rounding to the nearest 100 will only work for a big number. Rounding for 2 decimal places will only work for a small number. Let's quickly recap rounding to decimal places. This number rounded to 1 decimal place would be 0.1. Because the first decimal place is the 0, check the next one over, which is 7, which means that the 0 increases to a 1. To 2 decimal places, we would have 0.08. Second decimal place is a 7. Next one is a 9, which increases the 7 by 1. To 3 decimal places, we would have 0.079, because the next digit over is a 0, so the 9 does not round up. And to 4 decimal places, we would have 0.790. The 3 does not increase the 0, and because it does ask for 4 decimal places, we have to keep it in, even though it's a 0, because that's 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places. So significant figures we've already discussed are important because they apply to any size of number. It doesn't matter if it's a big number or a small number, we can still use them. So if I wanted to round each of these numbers to one significant figure, 682 Well, the first significant figure is the 6, the second is the 8, and the third is the 2. So the one significant figure means I want to keep in my 6. I check the next one over. Because it's an 8, the 6 increases to a 7. The other digits go to 0. In this example, one significant figure is the same thing as rounding to the nearest 100. In the next number, the first significant figure is the 4, because the first significant figure is the first non-zero digit reading from left to right. So the first one is the 4, then the 5, then the 1, and then the 2. So to round to one significant figure, I've got my 0.00 that I start with. 4 is what I'm going to keep in, but I check the next one along. Because it's a 5, it increases the 4 to 5, and then I cut off the rest of the digits, because keeping them in would suggest that they're significant. In a whole number, I don't cut them off, I replace them with zeros because they're placeholders and make sure that the 7 stays in the hundreds column. In a decimal, I cut them off because they add no extra information and they do not affect what column everything is in. This one was the same sort of thing as rounding to 3 decimal places. Let's try and round this, first of all, to one significant figure. The first significant figure is the 9. When I round that, I have to check the 8 to see whether or not the 9 is going to round up. The 8 does make the 9 round up. And when a 9 rounds up, it rounds up to a 10. All the other digits then go to 0. So the 0 stayed as a 0, the 5 has gone to 0, 1 has gone to 0, 0 stayed as a 0, 8 stayed with a 0, the 9 has turned to a 0, putting a 1 into the next column because it's rounded up to 10. To two significant figures, I've got my 9, 8, next digit's a 0, which doesn't affect the 8, the other digits become 0, which is placeholders. Three significant figures actually looks the same because my first is 9, my second is 8, my third is 0. The 1 didn't round the 0 up and the other digits go to 0. Four significant figures would be my first, second, third. The fourth one is a 1, but the 5 rounds it up to a 2. And then replace the 5 and the 0 with zeros. In this example, it's a decimal. So one significant figure. The first significant figure, remember, is the first non-zero digit going from left to right. So we've got 0.03 and the 0 after it didn't change the 3. Two significant figures, 0.0, first is 3, the second is 0, the 1 doesn't increase the 0. Now in this case, this 0 is significant, this one isn't. The first significant figure is the first non-zero digit going from left to right. Once I've had my first significant figure, zeros after it will be significant. To three significant figures, I start with my 0.0 and then I've got 3, 0, there's a 1, but the 7's going to round the 1 up to 2. This is an example with 9s so that we can see what happens. 999 to one significant figure. Well, here's my first significant figure, but this one will increase this by 1. So similar to the previous example, the 9 has a knock-on effect, which basically rounds this to 1000. If I did the decimal to one significant figure, again, the 9 that is the second significant figure increases the first one by 1, which has a knock-on effect into the units column. So the answer would just be 1.